Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you at the Digital German-Benelux FP&A Circle. My name is Olga Rudakova. I'm a FP&A professional, dashboard design trainer, and FP&A Trends Ambassador. I'm happy to facilitate this meeting tonight. We are going to speak about the power of driver-based planning and forecasting for modern FP&A. This topic is very hot in our FP&A community, and it has attracted way over 500 attendees from 52 different countries. I'm pretty sure that this topic will make a nice addition to already existing collection of nice meetings in our circle. If you want to watch some of them, recordings are available. Just visit our web. What can we expect tonight? Tonight we are going to speak about driver-based planning and forecasting. We will see dilemmas in driver-based planning in Shell. We'll speak about business drivers in FMCG industry using Storck case study. We will be walking a discovery journey for the true business value drivers with Deutsche Bahn. And we will certainly speak about enabling intelligent ways of working with Board International. Let me introduce our speakers, our panelists for the evening. Please join me here on the webcam, and I will start introductions from you, Remco. Remco Boer is VP of Finance, Shell Upstream Controller. He's responsible for planning and appraisal and reporting in Shell. Remco has 28 years of experience across Shell and Ernst & Young. Remco, we are happy to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, and pleasure to be here.
Our second speaker for the evening will be Massimo Garau. Massimo is the Director of Finance and Administration at Storck Deutschland. Massimo has over 30 years of experience in engineering, chemical, and FMCG industries. Massimo, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Next speaker, Tanja Schlesinger, is VP of Bahn Source at Deutsche Bahn. Tanja has 30 years of international experience advancing goals in unison in multiple top senior management roles in finance. Tanja, thank you for coming and joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
And the final speaker for the evening will be Andrew Turner. Andrew is responsible for finance solutions at Board International. Andrew has over 15 years of professional experience in finance and transformation, having worked with many companies of different sizes, including Global 2000. Andrew, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me too, Olga.
Briefly introduce FP&A Trends Group for those of you who doesn't know us yet. Well, it's not only source of online resource and education, it's indeed an international board presented in 29 cities and 16 countries. Now, you certainly can approach us for advisory and research and many other topics. What we can expect tonight at our webinar. It's a 90-minute event. We will participate actively in 4 polls, so we will see the results right away. Certainly don't hesitate to ask our speakers questions through Q&A box. Don't hesitate to connect your speakers to us through LinkedIn. Presentation will be available in handouts. It's already available in handouts, and you will receive presentation and the recording of the event after the session. Please make sure to take a part in a brief survey after this session. Your feedback helps us improve and make each and every webinar slightly better than before. Now it's time for me to thank our sponsor of the event. It's board international. It helps us reach our goals and drive digital transformation across our organizations. Thank you, board, for making this event possible. I have a couple of introductory slides for you as well. What I wanted to share with you tonight is actually our predictive planning maturity model. So take your time to look at it. And you see that with advancing stages, not only the complexity of the model and accuracy of the model improves, but the way we look at and the way we identify the drivers is itself moves from just user-defined, from our observations, through statistical based to actually machine learning defined drivers. And speaking of that, I really want to stop for a moment speaking about business drivers as such. Many of us in FP&A make this mistake and use actuals as a driver. So please, let's not do that. Last year's sales are not a driver for this year's sales. But where can we look at? There's several groups of drivers. Internal drivers are internal operational metrics that helps us plan, such as orders placed, materials purchased, items produced, and so on. There are a huge amount of external drivers that helps us build accurate models of our business, such as competitor prices, birth rates, inflation, tax rates, and so on. Having said that, look at our drivers and driver-based models in various industries. We will start with oil industry. And who else can better describe dilemmas in driver-based planning in Shell than Remco Bauer? Remco, please join me here on the camera. The stage is yours.
Yeah, once more, thank you, and a real pleasure to be here. What I will talk through in the next 8 to 10 minutes or so are essentially three things. One is why I think it's relevant to do driver-based planning in Shell. Two, talk a bit about the challenges that I then encounter and illustrate it with some of the examples I have. And then thirdly, to talk about what is needed from a system, but also a behavioral perspective. So that's the idea. And I start indeed with the slide that you can see on the screen now. As you know, and as all of you will surely experience, the external environment becomes more and more unpredictable. To be honest, the only certainty out there is probably that there is uncertainty, and then that will continue. If you look at our business, but that's probably similar for many industries, there are risks, the macro is changing, inflation was already mentioned, price volatility, currency movements, fiscals, policy changes by different governments if you're in a global company. So a lot of change, and just to mention a few, probably very specific for Shell, indeed being an oil company, but more and more energy company actually. Clearly, the price volatility that we've seen on the back of the horrific war between Russia and the Ukraine has caused such significant swings in the market, disrupted supply chain. If you then combine that with still lockdowns in China, on the back of Corona, that means that any outlook you prepare is difficult. So then moving to driver-based planning, what do you need to have in place to make that successful? It clearly requires a very deep understanding of your key risks, uncertainties, because you want to know what can actually influence those drivers. For instance, availability of assets can be impacted by pipeline issues. You need to be able to really know where the value actually comes from and what is your track record there, because that gives you a sense of how good your identification of your drivers actually are. And you may think you've got line of sight of the key drivers, but is that really true? And how reliable are they if you move into very extreme uncertainty scenarios that we see today? You need to have fit for purpose data granularity. And why is that needed? You need to be able to actually model and use the drivers at the right level. For instance, again, availability of assets that run your kit or your plant, for instance. You need to be able to do that. I've called it evergreen. You need to be able to model and work through your drivers into the holistic set of assumptions in order to see what your, if you like, ranges and outlook is. And the intention for all of that is then to really provide senior management with an updated outlook throughout the year. And this is not a static process. This is something you need to do continuously. So in my next slide, I will then talk about why that is relevant and what are some of the challenges that you can then encounter. So why is this relevant? Now the picture you'll see on the screen probably speaks 1,000 words, right? The forecasting horizon is shorting, and you quickly move into scenario plannings because there are so many different elements that can unfold and that then impact your business. So the increased volatility, the uncertain environment, that causes very, very significant swings and hence forces you to think about scenario planning. Now, within Shell, I tend to say that we're relative or fairly good at that. We do a lot of scenario management, the Shell scenarios, which are really pathways, demand outlooks in the energy transition. But in order to develop those, you really need to understand the drivers. So what influence actually the energy transition to go faster or slower? And how could that be influenced regionally, which we see more and more? If you're based in Europe, that is a different outlook, in particular with the high gas prices and the uncertainty around gas security, than for instance when you're in the USA or in the Far East. Then also there are very different drivers depending on the business segment we have within Shell. We're not only indeed an oil company, but we also have downstream, RES, so the renewable energy solutions, IG, integrated gas. And if I just name a few drivers for those different businesses, you'll get a feel for, if you like, the type of business drivers you'll need to identify. So if I start with the downstream business, you could think of things, for instance, in the growth area around EV charging points. So if we move more to electric vehicles, the way that will drive, or the drivers behind your future growth will be the number of charging points, for instance, that you have, either on the forecourts, so the Shell sites, but also elsewhere. You could think about different price movements. You could think about the seasonality there is in the driver season in certain countries. You could also think about refinery margins, which in turn are often influenced by global demand, for instance, for plastic or any of those type of chemicals things. So that's like one set. But then we also want to grow in, for instance, low carbon fuels, and that's a new area. So there you're very much looking at customer behavior, trying to see if you can create actually the demand for those fuels as well, which is a whole different business case. If you move to RES, so the renewable energy solutions, there is, for instance, all around the power that you actually put into the grid. It's around the number of wind farms, solar plants we have. And then in the upstream in IG, it's a lot around how you run your facility. So what is your availability? How could that be influenced, for instance, by turnaround, etc. So just a few examples to give you a flavor of the type of drivers that you need to look at, realizing that they're actually quite different depending on where you sit in the globe, but also depending on where you sit in the business. Now, what makes some of this quite challenging actually? Now we see very, very significant global and regional supply chain disruptions. It's very difficult to assess resources, have materials going into the shipyards to basically bring projects on stream, construction of projects, etc. So that's a big, big theme. The second one is around the energy trilemma. More and more what we see playing out is the trilemma between the energy security, the energy affordability, but also the energy sustainability. And more of that debate becomes regional, but obviously it very much impacts, if you like, the demand for energy products that we sell. And then finally, some of the new business models. If we're growing into renewable energy solutions, so for instance, the wind park and hydrogen, you're actually thinking about new business models that could then change, if you like, the way how you interface with customers, and hence they come with different business drivers. So a long way of saying is that you really need to take into consideration both the internal but also the external environment, identifying your drivers. So then in the next two slides, which I'll come to, I'll touch on a little bit two other very important components that you need to have in place to do that. First one is what you see here on the screen is digital and the systems. It's very clear that if you want to do this in an agile way, less manual, frequent updates, keeping basically your outlook evergreen, you need systems to support that. And I've included here a few digital enablers that we are very actively working on and have implemented in quite large parts of the portfolio by now. So one set is anything around basically the integrated nature of all your planning tools. It's around the digital collaboration tools. So how do you make sure that the different teams feeding into the drivers that then make your outlook, that they really effectively collaborate in building that outlook together? And then the one in the middle around your predictive analytics is clearly we're moving into an age where artificial intelligence and predictive analytics can actually help you an awful lot with that. If you've identified the right external business trends, and then you've got the right analytical tools, predictive analytics tools, actually they can help you model out ranges, what the future outlook may be. And you can also do that often in a very much less if you like, human interface manner, so it becomes much more objective and obviously a lot faster. So that's like one set. And then on my next slide, I'll come to more the behavioral side of that as well. So it's great to have the right systems in place, and again, they're very important. But I strongly believe, and within Shell, we strongly believe in the fact that it needs to be supplemented with the right behaviors as well. And one thing which we're very keen on is what we call the learner mindset, which starts with the leadership behavior, the tone from the top. Why is that important? If leadership doesn't support your driver-based planning, they're quite likely to question you on the outcomes as well. And so they really need to buy into what you're trying to achieve, how you identify the key drivers to actually support the results that come out of that as well. You need an integrated strategic and operational plan, a strategic roadmap that then really rolls into your operational plan. Again, why is that relevant for a company like Shell? We're moving into a new area of energy products that we offer, and then we need to be able to map out basically the strategic direction we're going, still exploring new projects, setting up, if you like, sectors where we want to decarbonize together with customers, and that needs to flow all the way into your planning, because if you have a disconnect between your strategic plan and your operational plan, again, you're quite likely to not be able to have good outlooks. And again, both of them need to be underpinned by drivers. Then the third one is very relevant to integrate your financial and your non-financial information as well. The obvious example within Shell is clearly around carbon. The ambition we've set to become a net zero emission company. That is one of the drivers that then influence how we do planning, and we need to make decisions on an integral set of data, which is not only the financials, but also takes into account in this case carbon, but there are other elements of that strategy as well. And then lastly, the acknowledgement also from senior management and embedded in the behavior that none of this will give you a single point outcome. So we need to start thinking in ranges that then inform us how we need to navigate through a very uncertain future, as opposed to being very fixated on single point, if you like, outcomes there. So let me leave it at that, and happy to take questions, and then very much welcome to also get a bit of sense how all of you on the call are wrestling with that topic.
Thank you so much, Remco, for nice topic, and actually for bringing in these last two bits, including digital enablers and behavioral aspect. I'm pretty sure that the fellow speakers will certainly elaborate on these areas even more. If you want to ask Remco a question, you can certainly do so through our question box. We will be collecting questions throughout the whole webinar. And at this moment, I want to ask you our audience question. Let me start with a polling question. The first one will be related to significant benefit of driver-based planning. So the question is, what's in your view the most significant benefit of driver-based planning? It allows to react to external environment changes. It enables creation of more accurate and meaningful forecasts. It promotes understanding of the business and its drivers, or you don't see any benefits. So what's in your view the most significant benefit of driver-based planning? It allows to react to external environment changes, enables creation of more accurate and meaningful plans. It promotes understanding of the business and its drivers, and you don't see any benefits. Let us see how you have voted. I'm closing the poll, and let me share the results with all of you. So what do we see here? That absolute majority, 54%, believe that it promotes understanding of the business and its drivers. And another almost equal results, 24 and 22, actually see benefit in creation of more accurate plans and ability to react to external environment. Remco, let me ask you for a very brief comment to these polling results. What do you think? Is it in line with your expectations?
Yeah, obviously, I'm very pleased to see that 0% believes that it has no benefits, because clearly there are very significant benefits, so that's very encouraging. I fully agree that if you want to do it right, it does promote the understanding of business and its drivers, and I think that will actually allow you as FP&A professionals to support your business partners better in making valuable business decisions. So that's absolutely true. Whether that's then like more than 50% or 40%, I think very encouraging results, I would say, Olga.
Thank you for your comment. And let's us all meet here on the webcam and have a short discussion between our panelists. The question to you is related to our polling question, and it's about how can we make driver-based planning suitable for any type of organization and industry. I understand that some industries or some types of companies can benefit more, some can benefit less. So how we can make sure that everyone benefits? And let me start here with you, Massimo. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to see that you say, how can we make it relevant to every industry or every company? Because, I mean, we already assumed that it is relevant. It's a question of how. And my point here would be that you need to customize it. I mean, you cannot assume a standard solution that you can transfer from one company to the next, from one industry to the next, but you have to go through the pain of deciding for your company which are the drivers that are really relevant. And to do that, you really need a lot of pain. You need a pain to convince the whole organization. You need a pain to invest in technology, in data collection, to see what really has an impact on organization. I think this is the first thing I would try to do.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you for your answer, Massimo. Tanya, what do you think? How we can make it relevant for any type of organization?
The word suitable already talks a lot about it. It's like a suit. It's like a tailor-made suit that needs an exquisite FP&A function that knows all about the organization. And the how comes with breaking down silos, in reaching out to your operations, to your marketing departments, to your sales, to have a joint approach. And the how is very difficult to describe it for any industry or any company as being the same, because it's always a mirror of what you find in your organization.
Great, great. Thank you for such a nice suit metaphor. Andrew, the word goes to you. How can we make it relevant to everyone?
I think it's important to identify and reuse the patterns that are applicable to the business. So if you take some companies, for example, in a product-related business, they would be looking at revenue drivers from volume, price, and mix in that respect, and it's quite common across product-related organisations. Another example would be subscription services, where they're looking for new customer acquisitions, upsell maybe onto a more expensive subscription, or indeed try and minimise churn. These are the kind of drivers for those organisations. So it's important, as Remco said earlier, to highlight which ones are important to your organisation, and then to make sure they're communicated and understood.
Great, great. And Remco, back to you. How do you think we can make driver-based planning suitable for everyone?
Yeah, I think first of all, fully agree and echo all the comments already made. I would probably add two things. One is I often come across people who say that they think it can be done because all the systems don't really facilitate it. I think that's a lousy excuse. I think people need to still work with it. To be honest, it's probably much more around the strong FP&A leadership than the systems. The system facilitate. The other point I would make is it really forces you to indeed be on top of what the key drivers are. And that actually is often quite difficult, but once you have them, will make your influence much more impactful. So really that this distinction between, there are probably 10 drivers, but what are the 2 or 3 that really make a big difference? And how can you help your business leader really manage those to the best possible? That's what I would add.
Right, certainly makes sense. Thank you. And on this note, we will be moving to another industry, to FMCG industry. And Massimo Garau will be speaking about business drivers in FMCG using Storck case study. Massimo, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening also from my side. Thank you, Olga, for your introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about my experience with drivers-based planning at Storck. Before we dive into the topic, I would like to say a few words about the company. Storck is one of the largest confectionery producers in Europe. It is a family-owned company founded in 1903, so it's almost 120 years of history. We are based in Germany, and from Germany we export worldwide. There are some peculiarities in the confectionery industry that are relevant to the topic today, and I will come to them during the course of my presentation. But before we get there, I would like to share with you the key steps that we needed to implement at Storck in order to apply some drivers-based planning. First of all was obviously enough to identify the key performance drivers. More on this later. We needed to estimate their development in the future. We needed to formulate some expectations, some objectives in terms of income statement effect, capacity planning, demand planning for ourselves. And of course, we needed to estimate what investment was necessary in order to achieve these objectives. Now, if you fast forward and we go to the next page, I can show you what we identified for ourselves as the key drivers for the confectionery industry. I said before there are some peculiarities. One of these is that confectionery is not one of the products that you put on your shopping list and you say, now I want to go to the supermarket and buy confectionery. In fact, as a matter of fact, quite the opposite very often, which basically means if consumers see us, we may have a chance of being bought. If consumers do not see us, then it's most likely that they will not buy our products. And therefore, as you see, all these drivers go in the direction of advertising, of reminding the consumers that we are in store and they can enjoy our products. So first of all, the listing. Without a listing, you cannot sell your products at the retail. You need to be present in leaflets, which are these newspapers that you receive in your post box with a lot of pictures of products and prices. You need to have some second placement. It's not enough to be present on the shelves, but consumers need to stumble upon your product everywhere in the store, and you need to advertise. If you do these 4 things right, then as said, you have a chance. Now the point is, the second peculiarity of the confectionery industry, and I guess this applies to most fast-moving consumer goods, is that if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have probably given you the same answer. And if you ask me this question 10 years from now, then I will probably again give you the same answer. It is a very mature industry. As a matter of fact, we eat the same brands that we were eating 50, 60, 70 years ago in some cases. And at least in our industry, this is probably going to stay like this for a while. I know that other industries where the product life cycle is a lot shorter, but for confectionery, it is this way. We have had some changes, of course, when the first online retailers appeared in the market. But basically the same principles applied. Listing is still an issue, but of course an online retailer doesn't have any constraint in the number of products they can offer. Leaflets, there are no physical papers sent home, but you all receive some mails reminding you of products or making you aware of certain products that you may like. There are no physical second placements, of course, but there are banners again. So as you see, there are some changes, but the same criteria apply also in the online channel, which is the last one that has been relevant for our industry. What I would like to show on the first page is a few criteria that we needed to apply to identify the key drivers. My first recommendation would be to screen and choose the ones that are really relevant, which basically means the drivers that you can control. And I gave you an example for the confectionery industry, but now, surprise, surprise, some drivers that we do not use are the typical macroeconomic indicators: GDP, inflation, purchasing power, unemployment, demographics, and so on. Of course, they are very relevant also for our industry, don't get me wrong, but they are criteria that we cannot influence ourselves, that we cannot plan for. So what do we do in this case is we use them as possible scenarios. We do a scenario with high inflation, we do a scenario with low inflation, which is particularly relevant nowadays, and that's how we solve it, but we do not plan inflation as such. The next step, again, once you have identified the drivers, would be to ask yourselves, what uplift can we generate if we change the value of the drivers? In practical terms for our industry, what happens if you are able to gain more second placements in store? How much will it impact your volume, and how much will it cost to achieve that? And then you can calculate a return on investment for this action. What you end up is a set of transparent assumptions that you will need to regularly monitor, that you will need to regularly report upon, because in that way you're also able to check your progress against your plan and eventually to introduce some corrective actions if they are needed. Now, I would assume that all this has been done, And I will come to the most important question on the next page, which is why do we do it? I mean, what benefits have we seen? And I will be very happy to share them with you. The first benefit, I would say, is that you can do a plausibility of your projections. Very simply, we all get some objectives that we need to achieve next month, next year. It could be growth, it could be profitability, whatever. If you have identified your key business drivers and you have planned them, then the first thing you could do is, for example, to say how should these drivers change in the future so that I am able to achieve these objectives. And the second question would be, is it plausible? Is it realistic? And then the next question is, how much will it cost? So that's one possibility how you can use these tools. The second set of benefits, I would say, they are of organizational nature, because it offers you the possibility to concentrate the efforts of the whole organization around a few points that are really important for your company. You make these goals also transparent for the whole organization, so everybody knows what the neighbor office is working on. It gives you a sense of belonging, because you will also be asked to say, okay, how can I contribute? How can my department, my function contribute to the achievement of certain objectives? And it will set the right priorities throughout the organization. The next step that you could think of implementing would be to support all this with a management by objectives, with a bonus system. For example, once you know what is important and you have a bonus system, for example, for your sales organization, you can say, well, these are the objectives I'm willing to pay a bonus for. And if we go to the next page, then I would like to show you the final benefit I see in all this process, and it is a scalable system. You can make it as big or as small as you like. Basically, you can do it for one subsidiary, you can do it for the whole group, you can do it for one brand, for the whole portfolio, for all customers, for a single customer, single channel. Or ideally, you could also say, okay, let's take product ABC in country Belgium, and let's plan the single driver for the single customer. So it's a multidimensional matrix, and it depends on your organization, your industry, how you want to apply it. And this would be my last slide. Thank you for the attention, and anytime you have any question, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Massimo, for your presentation. And indeed, we are going to ask you many, many questions. We are already collecting them through question box. So please don't hesitate to ask your questions. Meanwhile, let's have a question to our audience. Our next polling question is related to our experience with driver-based planning. So let me launch it and see. How would we describe our experience with driver-based planning? Is it non-existent, purely theoretical so far, successful practical implementation, or unsuccessful practical implementation? Let's see, where do we stand in our broad audience tonight? Let's see what is our experience with driver-based planning. Non-existent, theoretical, successful implementation, unsuccessful implementation. I think it's time to see the results. Let me close the poll and share results with you. What do we see here? The majority of you, 46%, have theoretical experience. So you are here to learn, you're here to know more about driver-based planning. Another 38% already have successful practical implementation. Wow, and 9% have non-existent experience so far. Massimo, what do you think? Are you surprised by the result?
I'm neither surprised nor not surprised. I really didn't know what to expect from this poll question. What I can see is it's always a question: is the glass half full or is it half empty? And I would like to see it half empty here, because less than 40% they say they have a successful practical experience. We have a lot with a theoretical experience, so these are the companies that need to do the next mile, I guess. There are also some who had some unsuccessful experience, and I connected to the question before, where everybody was saying no, or better said, nobody was saying there are no advantages. So I think we have somebody out there who need to give it a second try, so to speak, because everybody's convinced of the advantages, even those that haven't had a positive experience so far. So I think they should really do. I mean, I would encourage them to give it a second try, analyze what went wrong the first time, and do it better the next time.
Indeed. Let's see what we can do for them. Maybe the problem was exactly in identifying drivers in the first place. So let's all join us here and discuss another topic, which is how can we identify business drivers for our driver-based model. And let me start with you, Tanya. What you can advise us, how we can identify our business drivers.
I really liked Massimo talking about his discovery tour, how he tackled this issue of promoting the products, and that's either the location where you place the product or how you post on leaflets being distributed to households. So probably what you need to get started, your elevator to success is out of order, but you need to take the stairs. So it's step by step. And it's like moving forward, looking back, was it the right move or not? So the business drivers are mostly not so evident. But what I think what really helps us today is a different way of working with methods like agility. And that helps us discover that and moving from left to right and finding the right drivers for your business model.
Indeed. Andrew, let me move on to you. How can we identify drivers for our models?
So we need to identify correlations between the data we have available to us. I think there's a lot more technological advancements, let's say, that allow us to analyze the data available to us and identify correlations we may not understand ourselves. I'm looking towards machine learning a little bit in that respect, but we obviously know our organizations well, and we should understand what drives it from individuals. And it's pulling that out of the team and trying to obviously not only use those drivers, but at the same time being able to report on them and make sure did we identify the right one, and then keep that process moving on a continuous basis.
The answer certainly is somewhere between knowing the business and using modern technology to help us identify drivers and relationships. Let us see what Remco has to add. Remco, how do you think we can identify drivers the best way?
Yeah, so a bit building on that, two things I would add. One is, I think it requires deep curiosity and an external mindset. And you need to be able to really understand the external environment your business is operating in. And secondly, linking to what Andrew mentioned as well, really leveraging big data. I think it feels we're at the front foot of truly leveraging all the financial, but also all the non-financial KPIs which are out there. And if we really are able to channel those and then combine it with the external insights that we see from market developments or customer behavior or regional trends, I think that will unlock a lot. Those were the two additions, Olga.
Yeah. Massimo, back to you. How can we identify drivers the best way?
I agree with everything that has been said so far. I think for me, the key is having the whole organization involved. I mean, it's a collective exercise. You need to be able to be surprised. You have to take it into account that maybe you will find something that you hadn't suspected before. You need to be able to cut out some of the drivers and to choose the ones that are really important. In this case, less is more, really. And you need to have some solid technology, data, working, elaborating tools in order to support your choice also with some quantitative facts and not rely just only on your experience, your guts, and common sense.
Indeed. Thank you so much for all of your answers. And it's time for us to move to the next industry for tonight, and that will be transportation. Who can better speak about discovery journey for the true business value drivers in transportation than Tanja Schlesinger? Tanja, the stage is yours.
Thank you for passing on to me, Olga. I appreciate Remco introducing very early today, saying the environment is more unpredictable and very volatile. And too immediately a quote came up to mind of Albert Einstein. He said once, life is like riding a bicycle, and to keep your balance, you must keep moving. Now we all remember that we started out in FP&A with setting up performance canvases. And we needed to show more transparency on explaining differences the organization had in comparison to a yearly plan. Well, the performance canvas, it helped us addressing key performance indicators that specifically occurred, but explaining volume and price differences only, does that give you enough information to steer a company? I guess that such a performance canvas today, it doesn't allow us as incumbents to adapt our competitive strategies. Usually I hear, and today we had it as again, I hear that technology helps. Well, it certainly rewrites competition rules. Well, building and scaling products requires the right technical infrastructure, and you need to identify your capabilities and create such a blueprint for the end-to-end enablement. But I guess only by this, to lead your company in your competitive battle, that might probably not be sufficient. It might be your story of digital transformation and drive innovation in your organization. But to me, there is a second impact on our competitiveness, and it's been addressed by Remco too. It's that huge interconnection of geopolitical crises that have intense effects that stretch far beyond the original conflict. Remco told us, to him, it's like supply chain bottlenecks. To the next of our companies, it's soaring inflation, rising interest, decelerating growth. And I guess the impact of each decision that we try to support as an FP&A function, we need to be proactive and very resilient. So navigating uncertainty to sharpen an approach of managing that volatility and probably also cost reduction, we need a sound understanding of our business drivers in order to evaluate those trade-offs and successfully lead. It's always sensing, adapting, and then driving. And I guess at FP&A, there's only one certainty, and that is waiting for clarity. That is a losing move. So it's time to rethink our value drivers. We all aim at increasing financial forecast, and accuracy is a topic in itself. I question every one of you. Do you know your true business drivers, or do you strictly rely on KPIs? Do you describe value, value that can capture already anything out of your data? So I'll get to move on to my next slide and share my experience with you. I picked an example since we come out of the public mass transportation in Germany, and it's a discovery tour to the true value drivers for energy consumption. Again, Remco, I love that we share certain backgrounds. So in our organization, the performance canvas initially included two KPIs, energy cost and the other one relating to volume. So the cost was volume and prices. So we started analyzing volume, and a lot of explanation came either from hot summers where air conditioning needs went up, or cold winters when extreme weather conditions urged us to continue heating the trains when they were parked. But was it volume, price, and price as value drivers alone? At this point, we started an agile project to find out more about such influencing factors as the weather conditions. And we started setting up a small machine learning application. So in a first step, we joined the volume of energy consumption with weather conditions. That join happened in a typical algorithm, and the forecasts of weather plus historical data fed, so to say, that machine learning application. Then we added geofences for being more precise on the local references of temperature, humidity, precipitation. But still, our picture was not complete. We weren't able to fully explain with that algorithm all deviations for our plan for the volume, so in forecasting. And at the end, it happened to be all the human factor. It was the behavior of our train drivers. Because by nature, like us sitting in a car, they felt the urge to catch up delays by driving faster. Unfortunately, the time span between two train stops on a commuter train, that is such a short period of time that you can't catch up delays of any significance. And at this point of our journey as FP&A, we needed a mindset of parenting. Why parenting? Because as a parent, you feed your children first. So you feed your people in the driver's seat. The challenge was to develop insights for our train drivers to demystify the need of speed for reducing delays. And there was no way to derive that relevant data from our ERP. So that is why we connected silos. We retrieved the information from our operational application and linked that to the insights of the ERP data. And by this, we were able to give transparency and reached out to our operational staff, the train drivers. So we fed them with insights which they could put into action. Naturally, of course, with offsite trainings, then attended train rides, and of course, visualizing the value driver situation itself, the data. Our train drivers, interesting enough, it was the human factor at the largest impact to our energy consumption. That, of course, before energy prices soared up and put up another headache. On my next slide, I try to grab the essence. So in a complex world like operations, marketing, sales, we as FP&A, we need to navigate. And that is a wide range of global headwinds. Modern technology is an answer to achieve the advantage kick, but not alone. I think that reinforcing that financial performance, in addition to reach out as an FP&A function, we see ourselves as XP&A, that integrator that has the power to develop insights both useful to FP&A and your operations or marketing or sales. There is a three-word synonym to me, and it's addressing that me to we. And doing this, you merge your organization and let that understanding and influencing grow by giving transparency on true business drivers. So this, I guess, should be on everybody's top of the agenda. Agile work methods assist you, and it's always about that sensing, adapting, and driving. So our most powerful effect for sustainable value came by that me to we. Thanks for sharing your time with me.
Thank you, Tanya, for sharing your time with us and bringing in such an interesting example. It's time for us to ask our audience another question, and now it will be related to main barriers to actually adopting driver-based planning. So what do you see as a main barrier for implementing driver-based planning in the organization? Is it lack of knowledge about the topic, lack of management support, employee resistance, or lack of suitable technology. Let's wait for most of you to vote. I'll repeat the options. What are the main barriers to implementing driver-based planning? Lack of knowledge, lack of management support, employee resistance, or lack of suitable technology. Let me close the poll and share the results with you. What do we see here? Actually, almost even distribution. Slight majority names lack of technology as a main reason. Another 27% say that lack of knowledge about the topic is a problem. 21% state lack of management support, and remaining 19 see employee resistance as an issue. Tanya, what do you think? Are you surprised by the polling results at all?
Olga, this is so much in line with my expectations and as well with my experience. Looking for suitable technology, there's hardly anything that's a customized solution that fits with a shelf application. So you need to go for the technology that's adapting to your organization. The other thing, the question is, how do you get started? How do you crack to find out what's inside your diamond? And the journey needs to be done together. It's nothing that we can find out behind our desks. It's by reaching out, by understanding more of your organization. The joint effort makes the difference.
True. And I think we can continue that in our next mini discussion, where we can all discuss the biggest barriers and how to overcome them. I'll actually start with you now, Andrew. What do you consider the biggest barrier yourself, and how can we overcome it?
For me, the biggest barrier to driver-based planning is change management. I think we need to work in new ways and simplify the planning process. Realistically, there's a lot of operational people out in the business that understand their parts of the organisation, and typically planning has been a finance-driven activity. So it's about putting the power into the hands of the operational teams and making sure we have a cross-functional plan. Let's say it's making sure we can do that as best we can. And it does start, as Remco said right at the start of the discussion, that we need to change the leadership and the understanding that this is important, and it helps the organisation achieve its goals.
Indeed. Remco, thank you for joining on the camera as well. I wanted to pass the word to you. What do you consider the biggest barrier?
Yeah, I would definitely start with change management. So let me not repeat that. I think typically things fail because it's not properly managed. So probably the only thing to then add to that is, if you want to do that change management, you really need the strong support from both the top of the house on the finance and the business level. And this is not finance only. So that's the only thing I would add. It needs to be hand in hand with business.
True. Massimo, what you can add? What do you consider the biggest barrier?
I think a lot of barriers are in the organization itself. I mean, I think it's a multidisciplinary exercise. I think you need to bring all of them together. I showed you before some drivers. They are mostly sales oriented. Of course, one could say, well, what is marketing? I mean, aren't the brands are drivers? So you really need to set aside all the silos view coming from the single departments and make it as a joint effort. You have all functions around the table. You are already doing a first important step, I believe.
True. Tanya, back to you. I know that you have already answered these questions through your presentation, but if you have something to add, it's your space.
Talking about barriers usually is talking about pain points, and finding solutions for such a pain point is not by a holistic approach. It needs to get started with baby steps, very small moves forward, with addressing the question, always the question, do you have enough buy-in? What makes the buy-in? Who do you need to convince? And how can you integrate people for your initiative? I guess it's out of question to not be aiming at becoming a digital company. So the question is, how do you invite, how do you create curiosity? And usually with small pieces of success that is so convincing and puts the drive to your organization.
Well, so thank you for all of your answers, and we are moving on to the last presentation of the evening about intelligent ways of working. Now, Andrew Chornell will present us how can we enable these ways of working. Andrew, the stage is yours.
Yeah, so I'd like to echo what the other team panelists have said. Thanks for having me on today. I would like to shift the conversation a little bit from driver-based planning, if you will, to more the practices of building or transforming your planning solution, and how driver-based planning is more of an enabler. So obviously there are a few stages when defining and implementing new planning solutions. The process obviously begins with the platform we choose, and the models we build on that platform, and our deployment strategy and business practices that we follow, which is where I'm going to focus on primarily today. But just to cover off the pieces on the planning tools, obviously we could use tools that we all know and love, like Excel, individual planning tools, or we could build more or use and utilize more sophisticated and dedicated tools like Board. You would then build different models using different data sources, trying to draw correlations between your ERP data warehouses and other external feeds. And while deploying your process, normally typically through a project, you'd identify skill gaps in the team, which you may outsource to implementation consultants, etc., due to resource availability or skill gaps. Typically, they're treated as one-off events where project teams will perform maturity assessments, define requirements, and follow certain methodologies and provide implementation or user guides. Unfortunately, what typically happens, these processes stop when the project is complete and the skills are lost or they disperse. Businesses, unfortunately, don't stop, they evolve. So why wouldn't our planning processes? So our processes have been slow to adapt to technological advancements and ways of working. So if you think about the traditional planning processes, they were typically decisions taken at the top by senior management who decided this strategy in the direction of the company. They were cascaded through senior management, middle management, all the way down to the operational teams who were more focused on financial outputs and kind of, shall we say, putting together a budget or a forecast every 3 months. And it was very stop-start. So you might have a waterfall process, let's say, where revenue and gross margin is planned first, and the knock-on effect into sales and marketing, etc. And those aren't on costs, overheads, people costs. And then it would be very stop-start. So if one team was stuck or someone was off and you had like this hiccup in your process, another team would have to wait until that process was finished and they could pick up the baton. So moving forward into, and I mean, obviously on this stuff, it was a practical compromise between speed and engagement. So pretty much impractical even 10 or 15 years ago. So ideally, you'd want inputs from all the different functions in the business to try and input into a plan, as obviously the operational teams know more about what's going on the ground in the respect of what can actually drive their business forward. So one thing, as much as we're talking and we're discussing the business benefits of driver-based planning, it's even more important to effectively communicate the business strategy and identify the best value levers for the strategy within the organisation. So the same thing Remco mentioned, and I've alluded to already, with product-focused companies looking at volume, price, and mix, etc., and maybe trying to grow certain channels or certain category growth. So these are like drivers within those kind of organisations. So you need to ask yourself, kind of, what decisions can I take as a planner that drive the business in the direction of the strategy? So this is where we look at focusing on the levers, making sure we can enable teams to be a bit more autonomous and to feed into that plan, and essentially making sure when we have identified the levers we want to pull and to make sure we can drive that business benefit, we can also track them, as Massimo mentioned. So it's not just about creating a lever we can pull looking forward, but how can we actually kind of review its effectiveness? So we could use machine learning moving forward from there to understand a little bit more around the correlations of the data we have available to us that we may not, as humans, understand and draw the conclusions. I mean, Tanya highlighted the connection between the weather and energy usage, for example, on trains. I've also recently heard of a company that used the price of bananas as a leading indicator for the price of cocoa, which is an interesting connection. ultimately they've grown in the same climate, but the bananas were harvested earlier, so you could kind of get a feeling for what would happen for the price of cocoa. Obviously, as we're building this kind of cross-functional planning system in that respect, teams need the tools that are relevant to them. Individual teams, regardless where they are, operations, different channels, different sales teams, need to be able to work on a plan that is relevant to them. They need to be able to review the effectiveness of that plan and then change and adapt that plan moving forward in an autonomous and asynchronous manner, right? So they need to be able to make sure they can do their own scenario planning in an environment that makes sense to them, responding at a time that makes sense to them. So they're not planning a monthly forecast every single time. Not every team needs to plan on a fortnight, on a monthly basis. Some teams may want to reforecast on a weekly basis. Some teams, like say the marketing team, may want to replan their spend on a quarterly basis, for example. But what's important is that each team can see and respond to the decisions being taken by other teams around them, so they can understand not only the impact on themselves, but their impact on other teams in the business. So what we're looking for here, and this about the ways of working, is we do focus on the levers that are relevant to the strategy and make sure the right levers are being manipulated to drive the company in the direction it wants to go in. We want to enable teams to be more autonomous and asynchronous, so they can work independently and at a pace that's relative to them. And then we want to make sure that throughout the business, from the operational teams through middle management back up to the senior leadership team, that the strategy is continuously aligned. So there's a process going on where management talks to the ELT, for example, would talk to senior managers, communicate what that strategy is, and there's a continuous alignment so that the people at the lowest level in the operational part of the business are making decisions which are aligned to the strategy of the organization. And if that was to change, we can then obviously make sure that the lower level operational teams understand the direction, understand the change, and can make the right and the correct decisions at the lower level. And it becomes a lot more autonomous and asynchronous in that respect, which is really important, because half the time is lost with stop-start and miscommunication. So if we can improve the information being provided systematically to all of these individuals, then I think the whole planning process can become much more effective and efficient. So thank you very much. Olga, back to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks to you, all these complex process seems much simpler now, but because you have shown it in a single page and explained so clearly. My dear audience, if you have questions to our panelists, it's certainly time to do so. It's certainly time to ask your questions through question box. And meanwhile, we are moving on to our last polling question for the evening. Let me launch this poll, and what I want to ask you about is the biggest risk in launching driver-based planning. So the question is, where do you see the biggest risk in driver-based planning deployment? Is it planning solution or tools as such, modeling as such, FP&A skills, or ways of working? I'm really curious to see, where do you see risks in deploying driver-based planning solution? Planning tools, modeling, FP&A skills, or ways of working? As many of you have already voted, let's wait for several more votes, and now we can actually close this poll and share the results with you. What do we see here? We see that majority of our participants tonight see ways of working as the biggest risk, while modeling, planning, and FP&A skills go right behind. Andrew, what do you think? Is it something that surprises you?
No, this doesn't surprise me at all. I think that the planning solution tools have been there. They're increasing in their sophistication, and they should be leveraged. The models we create, just working top to bottom, the models we create should be scalable and reusable as much as possible. Obviously, if we can identify and focus on patterns, we can achieve that. And FP&A skills, I think that the individuals in the teams know what they need to do. It's just being able to make it a bit more autonomous. So I completely agree. The ways of working are the biggest barrier. I think we can overcome the other three easier.
Indeed. Could not agree more with you. And I think that allows us to move to our last discussion for the evening. Altogether, we can shift more to our role as FP&A professionals, as finance business partners, what we can do to promote driver-based planning. So please join me here on the webcam so that we can discuss. And I would like to start this question with you, Remco. What do you think? What we can do as finance business partners to promote driver-based planning?
Yeah, to be honest, it's just taking the lead and show leadership in this area. I think what this discussion shows is that it feels we all can see the importance, and we all believe in the relevance. We all believe that our companies need basically this to work, to be implemented. It may not be perfect on day one. So for me, it's about, okay, picking up the glove and start showing it. I think this is really a space where, as finance and as FP&A professionals, we need to show leadership. So it's just start doing it, to be honest, Olga.
True. Thank you for such an honest answer. Massimo, what do you think? What we can do as finance business partners to promote driver-based planning?
There is not much that I can add to what Remco just said, because I fully agree with it. As usual, I mean, from finance business partners, you expect structure, you expect methodology, you expect some transparency of results, quantitative analysis, and so on. So apart from taking the leadership on this project, because that's where it naturally resides, I think we should offer the methodology. So from the structure, the way of calculating, the way of collecting data, analyzing data, and so on. I think that's the value added we can offer.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Tanya, what do you think? What we can do as finance business partners?
I come back to one of my earlier statements that how do you convince someone who has no experience in it? So be ready to start aligning the planning and forecasting with a very dynamic business environment. It's a collaborative process. And as soon as we start reaching out and connecting cross-functional, that probably helps. And usually a showcase within your organization helps to move things faster than with just theoretical constructs.
Indeed. And back to you, Andrew. What do you think? What we can do as finance business partners to promote driver-based planning?
For me, one of the key pieces, as Tanya just mentioned, and well, the whole panel really, it's about engagement and enablement. If we can make the drivers relevant to the business users and make sure they're actionable and they can report and track the effectiveness of them, then we're actually going to make their role and their job better for them, right? They should be able to use one tool for everything. They should be able to update one plan, which feeds into a bigger plan, and it should be a value to them alone. At the moment, a lot of business users see a financial plan as an overhead. They don't see it as an assistance. They don't see it as a help to them. So I think if we can make it relevant to those, then I think they'll buy into it quite easily.
Indeed. Thank you all so much for your answers. And I have to say that we are receiving so many questions through the question box. I'll tell right away, we won't have enough time to answer all these questions. Now we'll try to answer some of them in writing. But meanwhile, let me start asking our panelists questions. There are some questions addressed directly to you, so I'll start with you, Remco. The question which is addressed to you is inspired by your combination of driver-based planning and scenario planning. It sounds like that. It is sometimes long and difficult to get to a single scenario. How do you manage several scenarios? So how do you manage? How do you combine driver-based planning and scenario planning? Please elaborate.
Yeah, no, a really good question. And I don't think any of us has said that what we're talking about here is easy, so to speak. So that's clearly a challenge. I think if I think of Shell, the company I work with, and the amount of change that is coming at us through basically the energy system, we must work with different scenarios. It's clearly a challenge, and clearly it involves work a lot of discussions, but I do not think there is anyone out there who can fully predict, if you like, what may be the balance of energy in 2030, let alone in 2040 or 2050. And we talk still about hydrocarbons, hydrogen is in the mix, solar, wind, will new battery technologies work, etc. And so what we do with that is we don't come up with like 10 different type of scenarios, but we do come up with 3, which we feel are in a way plausible outlooks. And then we start working with those and hence model, if you like, what the long-term future could look like. So typically that doesn't impact year 1 or year 2 or year 3 of your drivers, because it's not that overnight there are suddenly like 10 million of electric vehicle charging points in the Netherlands. Those things will take time. But you could envisage a scenario where that either goes faster or slower, and then you can have that discussion for any type of energy that we're trying to supply to the world. So it's limiting the number of pathways to maybe 2, 3, 4, and then make your business decisions on the back of those. And only time will tell whether some of the investments that we're now making will really pay off in 10 or 15 years time. That's I don't think we will have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that Shell has been in business for 110 years, so surely there is something that we do right in that sense. So few scenarios, work with it, and obviously make sure that not all your eggs are in one basket.
Thank you for such a clear guidance, not developing 100 scenarios, but rather apply scenario management to very few plausible ones. Next question will be addressed to you, Massimo. Someone is asking you directly, how did you establish that, for example, advertising is a relevant driver compared to other industry-specific drivers? And how do you measure the impact of those drivers? So how exactly you identify those 3 you mentioned, and how do you measure the impact?
It's another good question. I think it took a lot of experience and a lot of data collection to do that. At the end, we can demonstrate it weekly, basically, that whenever some of those things happen, you see immediate result on the top line. We collect the data to do that. If you think of leaflets, a company in our size in Germany would have hundreds of them per year. And so for each one of them, you have a lot of market data that support what happens to your sales when you do that. The same happens with media. We know that the landscape in media is changing very quick, but at least in Germany, TV advertising, for example, is still the #1 channel for advertising. So also there you can see, you can really plot sales against advertising and see how the 2 curves move together. So you can develop a lot of correlation analysis to see which drivers are really relevant. And you can also do the same, of course, for those that you think are not so important, and confirm that you've picked the right ones at the end of the day.
Right. And how do you measure the impact of drivers? So is it always one correlation, like 100% correlation, or you somehow manage to identify the impact?
We really measure sales. So we are able to relate them to our top line development. And you really see the moment you do have a second placement, your sales are X times bigger than when you don't. Because on the shelf, you are together with a lot of other products where you are outside of the shelf with some displays in the aisles of the markets. Then you see that people recognize you, recognize you, and then take your product. It's all very official, very well documented, by marketing institutes.
Certainly makes sense. It's a common sense combined with a statistical calculation. A nice answer, and let me move on to you, Tanya. Many members of the audience were impressed that you managed to identify human factor as a material value driver. The question is, what enabled you to do so? What is so different about Deutsche Bahn that you are capable of identifying such drivers? Is it culture? Is it mindset? Is it ways of working? I don't know, it's a tricky question. Can you try to answer?
Actually, it happened by accident. That's not a good question, not a good answer probably for anyone who wanted to have a deep analytical path described. Plus, it needs inspirational people who have an idea, who are close to operations, understand the business. And the third component in it was that before, we never had the opportunity to tackle the issue, but with modern technology, with tools that get you terabytes within a second run through, there's a new way of thinking how you can support your staff. And I think it's always, that's why I'm talking about discovering tours. You don't really know if the 100% solution comes out at the end, but your path that you walk together along, that is part of your success. Because both ends, FP&A and operations, start to get more transparency on each other's way of thinking. And as they mingle that, as they combine that, you get to, you level yourself up. And the way of reaching transparency is truly with the modern technology available today. Andrew would be unhappy if I wouldn't say so. It's a very large enabler.
Indeed. That's what I expected. In order for such accidents to happen, you need to create a proper environment. Now, let me move on to the next question, which is addressed to you, Andrew. There is one topic in your presentation that certainly attracted lots of attention. It's about being asynchronous. So actually letting every team work in their time when they need to update their plans. One of the members is saying that it sounds great and efficient, but does it lead to working in silos and everyone having their own disconnected plans? So can you please comment?
Short answer is no, it shouldn't, because the idea is that it becomes a communication tool. So you have you might work in your own autonomous way, but you understand you're part of a bigger process. You're part of the entire organization's end-to-end business process and planning process. So although touching on the questions of Remco, you may have different scenarios and you may plan your sales forecasts and everything else independently of everyone else, but at some point you get to a view which is your latest view, if you will, and that's what you're willing to present to the rest of the business. So if every organization, every part of the business runs their own what-if analysis, and they all run based on some scenario inputs, obviously some more extreme scenarios might come through the business, but generally you're trying to run the organization based on the drivers you identified that are relevant to the strategic imperatives and everything else that you're trying to execute. So you should all be essentially running in an autonomous fashion at a pace that relates to you, that you can then present based on the inputs that may be from a different team and the outputs that affect someone else. You update your plan, they get the results from your latest view, let's say, and they can respond accordingly. So if we can systemize this and we can put them into solutions, then ultimately, as soon as someone's finished, let's say Remco's finished his revenue plan and Massimo needs to understand it for his advertising campaigns, then you should easily be able to see what's going on. Okay, and if he does agree there's a new advertising campaign, Remco can get the green light to go and expect to up his sales. Now, the more we can automate that using new tools and technology, the better. But it's the ways of working, it's the communication. So I don't see technology removing the human aspect of it in the sense of the decision making, but I do expect it to facilitate that change quicker.
Nice, very reasonable answer. Thank you for that, Andrew. And last question I would like to address to all of you. We have covered this topic several times. It relates to leadership buy-in or management buy-in, but there are still many questions coming related to that topic. So if I can ask you to give one brief piece of advice, what we as a FP&A team can do to achieve this leadership buy-in for driver-based planning. Remco, what would be your piece of advice?
Oh, you keep starting with me with the difficult questions. No, look, I think, and maybe I'm speaking on behalf of Shell in a lot of transition. In a way, the business leaders will see it. I do not sense that there is, if you like, unclarity of the need. It's more how we go about it and how we implement. And to be honest, and I keep saying that we need to start walking and start doing it. So a lot of good points mentioned in terms of the skills we bring, the external insight, the structure, the rigor, sometimes the modeling skills, etc. And it's really about getting going, because if we don't do that, your business may well be out of business in a few years' time.
True. Massimo, what would be your brief advice? How can we achieve leadership buy-in?
I would probably say start small, but start. As Tanya was saying, keep riding the bicycle. Don't stop, because otherwise you fall down. So just start, but do it small maybe, so that you can learn without betting the whole process. Involve the whole organization, all the relevant functions. Maybe find a few influencers within the organization who can move it forward. And be ready to take into account also a few mistakes.
True. Thank you for that. Tanya, what do you think? What you can recommend to achieve leadership buy-in?
You probably don't want to hear, and you shouldn't hear, it's all by accident. No, it's not. You have to systemize. And there is luckily enough method there with agility as well as design thinking, where you have cross-functional teams working in your organization to bring out the value that is in your diamond. It's there.
Makes sense, certainly. And Andrew, back to you. What do you think? How can we achieve management buy-in?
Really, it's like anything we do, right? I mean, if we look at why we're talking about driver-based planning, is to get quicker insights and be able to understand how the business can respond to challenges that are presented to it, right? So if you take a step back and try to get management buy-in, if you ask the leadership team the question of, what would it mean to you to be able to get a timely view of your business, if something was to materially change, taking a planning process from say 6 or 4 weeks down to 2 or 3 days, as long as the people in that process understand that a change that's happened in the sales team or the advertising is immaterial to their area, where therefore, is it really relevant for me to update my plan? You can improve that time to value, right? So it's about understanding what's important, what are the levers we want to pull. And if everyone can update it really quickly, then, I mean, it shouldn't be, in my opinion, a hard sell to leadership. That's what they're looking for, right? They'd want that answer immediately. If they could just think it and have the answer on their laptop, they'd be really happy. But that's an ideal world, but we need to do that as quickly as possible and reduce that time to value.
Right. And on that positive note, I think we can move on. But don't worry, if we haven't answered your question yet, we'll try to answer it later on in writing. Meanwhile, let me invite you all to our upcoming event in January, already next year. It will be about Inside the Crystal Ball, top 5 trends shaping FP&A in 2023. Let me thank our sponsor, Port International, for making this event possible tonight. Port helps us reach our goals and drive digital transformation. Let me say big thank you to all of our audience for being here with us, being interactive, asking all the questions. And the biggest thank you to all our panelists and speakers for your insights, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your practical cases. Don't hesitate to contact our speakers through LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to contact us, FP&A Trends, through any channel you would like. Meanwhile, let me wish you good evening. Merry Christmas for those of you I won't see this year. And please fill in our short feedback form right after this session. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.